Right, folks, we've had 15 amazing speakers, but we've got one final one to come on stage. I do believe Emma is waiting backstage, so she's going to run the final few yards onto the stage. So please give her a massive round of applause for running 34 miles all the way to Skepticamp today. Hey! And we couldn't resist. I did want to run here myself today from Newcastle, but I didn't want to upstage Emma, and it would have been really awkward giving her the second place medal, so off you go.
So does everyone know how to tell if someone has run a marathon? The answer is don't worry, they will tell you. And that's just standard marathon runners. Ultra-marathon runners will co-opt entire speaking events in order to have a microphone and several hundred people they can tell how very far they've just run. So I've just run 34 miles. That's it, that's the talk. I was going to start today from outside of a prison, but given recent events, I thought that turning up to the front door of the prison and then running away might cause me some difficulty. And the problem would have got worse when the police caught up with me and then I explained that I was on my way to give a talk subtitled A Very Practical Guide to Prison Escape. And would have gotten even worse when I explained, yes, officer, I really am running all the way there. Honestly, that's definitely what I'm doing. I was also going to start this talk by saying that prison escape basically doesn't happen. And then the most high-profile alleged escape from prison happened just after I finished writing this talk. But don't worry, I've just had the last 7 hours to practice the new version to myself. And you probably won't even notice the really slick edits to my PowerPoint. So prison escape in popular culture is normally a little bit more exciting than real life. It's normally like these heroic, amazing sort of people going through ingenious schemes to get out, and they're always sort of righteous and innocent, like Andy Dufresne here. And whilst in, obviously, this scene of the Shawshank Redemption, he is tunneling through shit, it's normally a little bit more sexy than you would imagine in real life. It's certainly sexier than whatever's going on here at the moment. It's sort of amazing tales of daring do, sort of going through the wilderness instead of Warrington. And but the reality is a little bit different. If you look at the articles that you see in the press with the words prison and escape in them, normally, well, first of all, it seems to be happening quite often. But also, these aren't heroic tales. These are sort of scary people who seem to be escaping from prison all of the time, if you look at the press. But here's the thing. When you see articles like this, the prisons that they're referring to, those North Sea Camp, Hollesley Bay, those are open prisons. There are no gates to break through. There are no walls to climb over. You can walk straight out of them. You can walk straight into them if you've taken leave of your senses. Now, none of the people in any of those articles, and usually most people that you see who are said to have escaped from prison in news articles, haven't actually escaped. The definition of escape is as it is there. It's breaching the perimeter of a closed prison for more than 15 minutes. If less than 15 minutes, you're fine. So the people that you see in most of the articles that you read that say prison escape in them are absconding. They're not escaping. And if you're in open prison, there will have been some kind of assessment undertaken that has determined that the risk of you walking straight out of that prison is not terrifying. And that's borne out by the statistics with absconders. They're very, very rarely caught doing something else, committing another crime. And in my experience, quite often some of them will be gone for years and then they'll get caught from their tax records, from their very law-abiding life they've been leading while they've been away. So as you can see here, the stats for prison escape, they're quite negligible in recent years. Although in that same period of time, the prison population has doubled. Now, having just said that prison escape quite often doesn't happen, it's not normally very exciting. Now, everyone knows that now. But I was going to tell you all about this really exciting 1987 prison escape with a helicopter. But I don't have time to tell you about that now. It was really exciting, though. And following this escape from HMP Gartree, a shiny new Category A prison was built called HMP Whitemore that was supposed to try and make escape impossible. So most prisoners, if they have sort of the means or the connections to make good an escape, so sort of organised crime gang type people, they should be kept in Category A conditions, from which escape should be impossible. But given my recent kind of reverse talk subject normative determinism, one is probably happening right now. But in theory, it's impossible. There's a very high staff to prisoner ratio. They get very little access to outside space. All of their contact with the outside world is monitored. It should be very difficult. And if you do get caught escaping, you have to wear a clown suit like Charles Bronson's wearing there. And a note in the hearing yesterday when Mr. Califf pleaded not guilty, he was also wearing one on the video link. So what this means is that most people who do manage to get onto the other side of the wall don't have the means or the connections to make good that escape once they're there. Because you're entirely self-reliant on yourself for food, funds, shelter. Any contact that you have with society risks you being recaptured. And I think, obviously, whilst Mr. Califf did plead guilty yesterday, he was outside of the prison, and within 4 days, he was only 13 miles from HMP Wandsworth. Obviously, I've just done like 34-ish miles in 7 hours, but I have the benefit of all this running wanker gear and fancy hydration. So it's really quite serious for people if they get recaptured. You get another conviction. The time that you're out doesn't count towards your sentence. You have to wear your clown suit. So why would anyone do it at all? Now, thankfully, the most newsworthy alleged prison escape in decades happened 2 weeks ago. So I have seen a lot of articles like this one talking about how terrible prison is at the moment. Because prison is shit. That might be a surprise depending on where you get your news, but it is shit. And they're currently in terminal crisis. You'll note there, at the time that Mr. Califf had his little thing, because was he pleaded not guilty yesterday, Wandsworth was at almost 200% capacity. They have multiple men in Victorian cells built for one person. The budget for prisons is still not where it was in 2008. I mentioned earlier the prison population has doubled since the 90s. The capacity hasn't doubled during that time. And I mentioned earlier fancy new Category A prison, HMP Whitemore, that was built following the fancy helicopter escape that I wasn't able to tell you about. It's only 70% full at the moment, but according to its most recent inspectorate report, to paraphrase, it's fucking awful. His Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons say that 3/4 of all prisons in this country are currently failing in some fundamental way. It's really not surprising that, I should say, it is surprising that escapes don't happen more often. I laughed when I saw the reporting from HMP Wandsworth that they were on lockdown after what's happened with Mr. Califf. They're always on lockdown. There aren't enough staff to manage the prisoners. They're banged up 23 hours a day. And I went to a newer prison a couple of years ago, and I was in the visits hall, and the inexperienced staff, were all very frantically working out what to do because they'd forgotten to put wristbands on the male visitors for the social visits when the visits were already underway, so they couldn't tell who was visiting and who was a prisoner. And I know of at least 2 occasions in that prison where someone has almost walked out for that reason. And so it's quite surprising, actually, that escapes aren't more common. And whilst they aren't, accidental releases, there were 54 accidental releases last year, which that's just admin fuck-ups and doesn't require any running at all. So the problem here is that you go to going to prison is the punishment, right? Being punished at prison isn't what should be happening, but it currently is. The prisons in this country are currently hell on earth, and we should hope at a minimum that the people that go there aren't worse than when they come out, and that's not what is currently happening. I don't have that many people who have literally escaped, but I do know a lot of absconders, and two most common reasons for abscond: one, to visit terminally ill relatives, mother, father, partner, in one horrifying instance, child, or they can't handle the bullying and the drug culture that's there in these decrepit and overcrowded jails. And the problem is that when these absconds of despair get described as escapes in the press, the government always end up doubling down and causing more damage to the prison population rather than fixing the chronic resource issue. And then they keep making the situation worse and worse and worse in this horrible cycle. So I just ran a very long way to tell you all of that. And so in summary, escape is rare, and it's surprising that it is. Prison is shit. If you would like to help campaign for evidence-based penal policy, which is what the Prison Reform Trust does, please give me some money. Have a good weekend. I am going to go and sit down for a little while. Thank you.
Not yet. Not yet.
So, our first question is from Cole, and I think it's a question we all really want to know the answer to. How are your legs?
They're all right. They're a bit dirty, if you can. People at the front can see. I had to paddle a little bit.
Next question from Bremner. If you are accidentally released, have you legally escaped? I'm not sure you'd be accidentally released, but...
Well, because they can mix you up with someone else, or they can just misread their records and think that it's your release date when it isn't. And that's much more dangerous. There have been some quite high-profile examples of very, very dangerous people being released by accident and committing very, very serious crimes after doing it. So, the fact you're outside of the walls wouldn't be a crime, but when you're aware of it, when you become aware that you're incorrectly released, you would then technically be committing a crime. You'd be unlawfully at large.
Next question is from Claire. What is the relationship between the private sector and prisons in the UK in comparison to the US specifically?
So there's about half a dozen privately run prisons in the UK. They, in my experience, tend to be worse because they're all on a very horrible downward trajectory. But the private ones tend to be a bit worse because they tend to have they have higher staff turnover, inexperienced staff that they're paying very low wages to. Prison officer used to be like a profession, like police officer or teacher, but it's very much not that now. It's like they get paid the same as you would get paid working in like McDonald's for a much more difficult and dangerous job. That's that.
I guess following on from that quite nicely, how deliberate are the poor conditions in prisons in the UK, I guess? Is it incompetence and lack of funding, or is it extra punishment?
So the main answer is lack of funds. Like I said, the budget's not where it was in 2008, but the population is significantly higher than it was in 2008, because the Ministry of Justice is one of the departments that wasn't ring-fenced during austerity. But then also, I don't know how deliberate it is, but it's useful to certain people of certain political persuasions, because a lot of people do feel that prison should be bread and water, bare cell, no mattress kind of thing. And so it's hard to tell.
And the last question is the fact that people, from Ego, by the way, of course, is the fact that people escape from open prisons is used by prison lovers against the whole concept of open prison?
It is used, so then they're not escaping. That's why it's a very thing that gets me very angry. They are absconding, they aren't escaping. It's that you can walk straight out. There's no effort required. Yes, it is, because what they'll do, the first thing they'll do is look at the offence the person committed and go, oh, this scary person is out, we should get rid of them. And no one wants to live near to an open prison because it sounds really scary. But the people there have been assessed, risk assessed. And the idea is that not necessarily on how likely it is that they'll walk out, but if they do, how dangerous is that?
Emma McClure, everyone. Big round of applause.